Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second session in our Planning for a Gnarly Future online learning series. Today's session will focus on reframing, focusing on assets, not deficits. I'm Danya Amori, the director of the Wallace Stegner Center Environmental Dispute Resolution Program and a professor of planning and law at the University of Utah. And I'm also the founder and a co-director of the NAR Initiative. And my particular expertise is in conflict resolution and facilitation, and framing and taking what we're going to call an asset-based approach are core skills for my work, both in conflict resolution and also with NAR community. So I look forward to spending some time today talking about these topics with you all. For anyone new to the NAR Initiative, NAR, G-N-A-R, stands for Gateway and Natural Amenity Region. And the mission of the NAR Initiative is to help Western Gateway communities and natural amenity regions really thrive and enhance the things that make these places so special. I'm from a NAR community, and the whole team cares very deeply about these places. And we really seek to do so through catalyzing and supporting research, education, and capacity building efforts, again, to help these areas protect the things that make them special and deal with ongoing and emerging challenges. The NAR Initiative is hosted in the Institute of Outdoor Recreation Tourism at Utah State University, and it's a partnership effort among the Institute of Outdoor Recreation Tourism, Utah State University Extension, and the Wallace Stegner Center at the University of Utah. To learn more about us, you can check out our website. We'll put that link into the chat. On the webpage in the chat, you can also sign up for our NAR Initiative email to learn about our future events and keep up to date on what we've got going on. So this session is the second in our training series, again, called Planning for a Gnarly Future, Reimagining Planning to Empower Your Community. And each of the sessions in this online learning series addresses a topic we have identified as being really valuable for NAR communities. And we've done a lot of research on these places. We spent a lot of time talking to these communities, spending time there. And so from all that work, we identified these topics as being some things we thought would be really helpful. And as you hopefully can see from the names, our overall framing is on this idea of reimagining planning, rethinking the way we do things to better suit the realities of the world and current and emerging challenges. Our first session, which was last month, focused on refocusing on values as vision, basically the idea of using shared community values as the North Star to guide community planning and decision-making. We have a recording of that session. I encourage you to check that out. We'll share that later today. Today's session is the second in our lineup, and we'll focus on reframing and again, using an asset-based approach to community planning and decision-making. Our third session, which is in January, will focus on re-engaging with the idea of mobilizing your community members as part of what we call the problem-solving enterprise. How do you really empower your community members to be part of solutions? Our fourth session will be in February and is on redefining. It will focus on regional collaboration and working across boundaries. And our fifth session will be in March, and we'll focus on reimagining planning as an ongoing activity and really thinking about how do you do planning in a way that accounts for uncertainty and things like scenario planning. So we'll lean into that in the next spring. All of these sessions build on and tie to each other. If you missed the first one, I encourage you to check it out. I hope you'll participate in the upcoming ones. And I will actually refer to some of the ideas from our first session throughout today's session. So we'll put the learning series website link in the chat for you. You're welcome to check that out. And that will link you to the recording from the first session if you're interested in checking that out after today. For those of you who are new to NAR Initiative webinars, a few things in terms of what to expect. First, the session is being recorded, and we'll share this session recording along with the webinar summary via our website after the event, so you'll have that to share with other people. And throughout the session, those of you on this live webinar should expect to engage. If you have questions for me, the speaker, you can submit those questions via the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. You should see a little Q&A button. Click on that. You can type questions in. I will take questions if I have time or as they seem appropriate to what I'm talking about. In addition to taking your questions for me, we also want to give you some questions and get some feedback from you all. So we're going to use the chat feature to give you some questions, have you share your thoughts. So use the Q&A function to give questions for the presenter, for me. Use the chat feature to respond to the questions we are going to provide you. And when you respond via chat, please make sure your chats are going to everyone. That way all the participants can see them, which is the whole idea. So let's give this chat thing a try. We want to get a little bit of feedback from you all. So again, please make sure your chat replies are going to everyone. And we're going to put this prompt in the chat for you. And the prompt is, what is your organization? What community do you live in and or work with? And what's one aspiration you have for today's webinar? So look at that prompt in the chat, type your response into chat. When you're ready, you can just submit that and we'll see what folks have to say. I'll give just a little time here for folks to get those entered into the chat. I see those coming in. And as these keep coming in, I'm just going to reflect some things I'm seeing in the chat. Thanks to everybody who's sharing, getting a better grasp of how to focus on assets rather than deficits, taking that more asset focus. Just the desire to take more of an asset focus it goes a long way. Interested in getting some examples of what other communities are doing. If you're really interested in that, we hope you will join us for our follow-on peer-to-peer session, which will be right after this session. We'll give some more information about that later. Hope to learn how to be more positive about visitors, about different challenges. One of the things we'll talk about in a moment is this idea of problematunities. Problems are also an opportunity, right? That's an important reframe. And lots of good stuff coming in here. Yeah, how to shift the lens. That's the whole idea, right? A frame is a lens through which we see the world. So I'm going to keep letting those come in and give you a chance maybe to look and see what each other are saying. I can't promise to hit all of your aspirations. Today is kind of basically a teaser for this topic, but we'll at least get into some of these things and hopefully get you all started in really thinking about those different aspirations you all had. So speaking of such things, our vision for this online training series is Planning for a Gnarly Future series. Our vision was to start off with these kind of mini trainings, these online trainings, these little webinars we're doing. They're short, 45 minutes. So really just going to give you an overview of the big idea. And what we're hoping to do is get some feedback from you all, hear your ideas, get a better sense of your needs. And if there is a need, and if we're able to mobilize resources to do so, our vision is to create a fully fledged online training series where we go a lot deeper into these topics and really get into the how, support more peer-to-peer learning. So that's what we'd like to do. If you think that's a great idea, we will be looking for people to partner in helping us make that happen. All of the projects we do are partnership efforts supported by funding from many places. So speaking of such things, the sponsors who have made this little mini training series possible are listed here on this slide. And we want to note that the American Planning Association Utah chapter is providing AICP continuing education credits for this and our other webinars in the series. So if you would like to go after those CE credits, there's a link that we're going to put in the chat. You can use that to get to those credits. And we are always looking for more sponsors, more partners to make more things happen. Again, if you like the idea of a fully fledged training series or any variety of other ways we can partner, just let us know. And if you find this training series and our other work helpful, we always welcome donations. We are, as we say, a soft money funded organization. So we're going to put a donation link in the chat. If you have any ideas about sponsors, if you want to donate, let us know, use that link. Okay, without further ado, let's jump in. So let's talk about framing, right? What is a frame? As I said just a moment ago, basically a frame is a lens through which we see, understand, and talk about the world. The way we talk about the world creates the world we see. So those things are all really interconnected, right? The words we use in our heads and in our communities, and the words we use with others create the world we see. So being thoughtful about our language and how people are talking about things, that actually really matters. And the words we use also inform the narratives we hold about the world, right? Is the world a place of deficit or is the world a place of opportunity? Well, how we talk about it actually is going to frame how we see that. So how we see the world, how we see situations, how we see other people, how we see ourselves, and what we see as possible or not possible. And we're going to dig into some examples that illuminate that. So just first and foremost, thinking about, gosh, this thing is an insurmountable challenge. If I see it that way, then I'm going to perceive it as an insurmountable challenge. Right? Versus, wow, that's a big challenge. What opportunities does this challenge present us? Right? What could we learn? What can we do different? And we'll talk about how this is not just rosy tinted glasses. It's just literally seeing the same thing two different ways. One of the ways of seeing it is disempowering. One is much more empowering. And a big way of thinking about this is what I call and my team calls a problemattunity, right? In every problem, in every challenge, there is an opportunity. And just that simple reframe in our minds goes such a long way in helping us be empowered to make positive change. And an example of what this kind of looks like in a community setting, right? Two ways of seeing the same effort. We can say, come talk about our affordable housing crisis. And when you say crisis, I get neurologically dysregulated and I'm already like, oh my gosh, this is a huge problem. Or we can frame it around, come talk about how our community can work together to provide affordable housing for local employees, which typically is kind of the crux of the crisis in many communities, right? And that's not rosy tinted glasses. It's just much more of come be part of a conversation that's inspiring and actually makes you feel like you can be part of the problem solving enterprise versus come be part of a conversation that feels overwhelming and it's hard to know where we could go from here. So as we walk through this session, I'm going to talk about framing and reframing, and these are sort of two sides of the same coin. Framing is how we present information, right? Your own thoughts. So you don't necessarily have to verbally say it, but whatever you're saying to yourself, your self-talk, or what you say out loud. So how you frame your thoughts and your statements. Reframing is this tool. If something has been said, can we try to reframe it in a more positive direction? So helping other people or even helping yourself reframe thoughts and statements. And as we'll talk about later, a core part of that is not taking someone's words and putting them into yours. It's more of taking those words, moving them in a positive direction and hearing the underlying intent. So somebody really feels heard and understood, and we're just helping move in a positive direction. And the whole idea behind what we're going to talk about as what I call empowering framing is this idea, as I alluded to before, of shifting from a disempowering frame. This is a crisis. I'm overwhelmed. I can't do anything, to an empowering frame. Yeah, this is a huge challenge. How can we make it an opportunity? And I like to think about this as well. For those of you who are skiers or bikers, you know, when you're learning to ski or bike, you want to look at the path you want to take, not the trees you don't want to hit. And even when you're a consummate skier or biker, you still want to look at the path you want to take, not the trees you don't want to hit. When you look at the trees you don't want to hit, you're probably going to hit them, right? So when we are thinking about framing, if we're all focused on the problems and we're focused on kind of the negative, we're probably going to fall into that trap. We're going to hit that tree. So we want to be focusing more on the path we want to take. And that's the empowering frame, is illuminating that path in front of us. So again, the whole idea is really to empower yourself and others to be part of, as you're hearing me say, what I call the problem solving enterprise, right? How are we going to work together to address this problem that's affecting us and our community? Where does empowering framing matter? Everywhere, all the time, right? How we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we live our lives, it matters in all aspects of our lives. So everything I'm going to talk about today is as relevant for your personal life as your professional life, for your work with your community, etc. And I do want to emphasize it's really important for policy conversations, planning conversations, and community engagement efforts, right? Because if I frame a conversation as come be part of talking about our housing crisis, when people show up, again, they're already in kind of fight or flight. This is a huge problem mode. Whereas I make it much more inviting, like, yeah, we're going to dig into the issues and we're going to work on it together. People come with that intention, right? So it really matters in how we talk about our public efforts. So what is this empowering framing thing? Teach a lot about framing, reframing, and I really kind of thought, what are the core principles we really want to drive home? And this is what I came up with. Hopefully they resonate. And I'm going to walk through each of these, give some examples. The first is to focus on the opportunities, right? We're not denying the fact that there are huge challenges, and we're going to really focus on the opportunities. So focus on the situation and the thing that we're trying to work on, not the people, not personalizing the problem. And again, I'll talk about that in a moment. Focusing on what we call interests, the underlying needs and concerns, versus getting really positional or focusing on particular solutions, right? And that really opens up a more creative conversation and helps people feel like we can focus on the right things, and then we can co-create solutions together. Talk about that more in a moment. Focusing on assets, right? Really taking this asset-based approach and not framing everything around deficits. And as I put it, being responsive, and we'll talk about what this means, but being responsive and not reactive. So let's dig into those things. So the first principle, again, focus on the opportunities, not the people. A focus on the people perspective is something that makes it personal, right? It's about those people. It's their problem. It's my problem, right? Versus this is something that affects us all and we have to work on it together, right? And that's the opportunity focus. Focus on the challenge and the opportunity that brings you into conversation or interaction with each other. And that could be anything from in a marriage, you know, we're married and we have a relationship with each other. And that's the opportunity, right? We want to maintain this relationship. It's not specifically about you're terrible, I'm terrible, right? But how do we work together to improve our relationship? In a community setting, right? It might be that instead of being like, and I'll give some examples here, right? Like instead of it being, this is the rich people's fault or the whoever's fault, it's like, how are we going to work together on this, right? So a focus on the people is like, I can't get along with that person is a jerk, right? The focus is on the individuals. And the focus on opportunities is something more like this relationship is challenging. How can we work together to make it better? So focus on the opportunities, not the people. Another way of thinking about this is depersonalize the challenge, depersonalize the frame. Second principle, focus on interests, not positions. I teach a lot of negotiation and conflict resolution, and this difference between interests and positions is one of the most important things I teach in all of my work. So if you walk away from this conversation just being a little bit more aware of differentiating interests from positions, that's a huge success. If you want to know more, happy to talk to you more about that. We have lots of resources on it. The basic idea is that a position is a proposed solution or a strategy to solve a problem. So how somebody proposes to address the problem or situation. The interests are the underlying needs and concerns. So you can think of the position as the how, the interest as the why, the underlying, what am I really trying to achieve here? And I do want to note that interest can be substantive, like something that I'm hoping to kind of get for myself or I need, procedural, like a sense of kind of fairness or feeling included, and or relational and emotional, right? And like just being heard is one of the most key interests most humans have in this world. So when you have angry people show up at your community meetings, probably the most important thing is to help them feel heard. You don't have to agree with what they're proposing. You don't have to say like, yeah, we're going to do that thing, or no, we're not. You just say, I hear you. It sounds like this is really a concern. We're going to take that into consideration, right? So feeling heard is one of the core interests people have. And so often we miss that. That's a whole other conversation I could do a training on. We're not going there today. To stick with this idea of shifting from a position framing to an interest framing, a position framing might look something like the town needs to build more apartments, or the town needs to relax its building codes, right? Those are a means to an end. Why? What is it that I really care about those things? What are my underlying needs and concerns I'm expressing through trying to propose these solutions? So interest framing might be something like, this community is really special to me, and I'm really concerned about being able to work here and also afford to live here. Right. So that might be the statement of, these are my real underlying concerns. And it opens up this possibility of how are we going to work together to address those concerns versus I'm coming in already with a position, which is probably going to make other people get their backs up. And then we're going to get in a positional fight. Doesn't work very well. So principle 3, right? So we had the focus on opportunities, not the people, focus on interests, not positions. Third one, very much related, is focus on assets and not deficits. So deficit framing is basically defining situations, people, and things by their problems or limitations. And a classic example of this is something like at-risk youth. I'm basically saying those youth are at risk. I'm already bucketing them as being in deficit. Asset framing is defining situations, people, and things by their assets, the opportunities, their aspirations, right? And that might be, how do we help these youth get to a better place? How do we create opportunities for these people to fulfill their potential? I'm not defining them by deficits. I'm helping to think about how do we create those aspirations. And I'll come back to an example around that in a moment. So deficit framing might be something like, those outspoken community members are really a problem or really an issue. An asset framing might be, there are a lot of thoughtful people in this community who care about this issue. Look, they're showing up. They want to be part of the problem-solving enterprise. So how do we tap into their ideas and energy? And I know for many of you who've run a lot of public meetings and probably had a lot of frustrating situations, it's really easy to fall into personalizing the problem. Those people are terrible. They always come and they yell, whatever that might look like. And that deficit framing. Why don't they know better? Why are they creating problems for me? And again, instead, look for the asset there of, ooh, these people care. They came to this meeting. How do I harness that energy to create something new and better? How do I help bring them in to be part of the problem-solving enterprise? I think it's a huge reframe and much more likely to get you to some good outcomes. So then the fourth principle is the idea of being responsive and not reactive. And this is kind of a deep, important thing for our lives in general. But the basic idea is that reactive framing is to see yourself as being acted upon, like this is happening to me, kind of I'm a victim in the situation, to be emotionally, as we put it, dysregulated, right? Just letting your emotions drive you. Like they yelled at me and now I'm angry and now I'm responding from anger. I'm actually in my lizard brain, I'm fight, flight response. I'm not actually being rational. Like that's reactive, right? When people get reactive. Responsive framing is to keep ourselves calm and collected, to do our own work so we can be emotionally regulated and we can be responsive. And a huge part of that is focusing on your and others' agency to act upon the situation. So versus this happening to me, I am working on it. That's a big reframe. And part of that is to not push aside all emotion, right? We can be very responsive and very rational and still have strong feelings. So communicating and validating emotions, yours or others, but not being driven by them. So what this looks like For example, reactive framing might be somebody who's like kind of yelling around and like, all these people moving in are destroying this place, right? We've heard those statements from people, right? So I'm just being reactive, like this is happening to me. I'm responding from emotion. I'm not really stepping back to think about how can I help make this better? So a responsive framing might be, I'm really concerned about the rapid growth happening in our county, and I want to be part of figuring out how to manage this growth in a way that protects and makes this place special. Right. And I can say, I'm really concerned about this. Like I can bring a lot of emotion and I'm bringing it in a regulated, responsive way. I'm not letting it drive me. Okay. So that's all great. Got some principles, but how do you actually do that? And that's probably the topic for a fuller training. We're not going to go too deep into it. And I hope I can leave you with some tangible, actionable takeaways. So the biggest and most important thing is to listen carefully. So we talk about effective listening as listening to understand. So listen carefully to yourself, right? If you're thinking about how do you frame things, what do you care about? How are you going to be productive in your framing? And or listen effectively and carefully to others. So other people, your community members, people you work with, etc., to really try to understand and identify what is that opportunity, that challenge or opportunity that brings us into conversation or interaction. So often we lose sight of that and we make it personal, like my husband's a jerk versus, hey, we're in this marriage and we want to make it work. So focus on that opportunity, but really listen to understand what that might be. Listen to understand the underlying interests and emotions, again, yours or others. What's really going on for this person? Ooh, I hear you're really concerned about this. I hear that your family's been here for a couple generations and you're seeing change and you're worried about it. I hear that, right? And that's not a threat to me. I can hear that and let you know I hear that. And I hear you're concerned about being able to live and work in this community or about these impacts on the resource or whatever, right? Those underlying interests. So listen for that. And then you can reframe and kind of help reflect that back to someone. And I'll give some examples of this in a moment. So listen for the opportunity, listen for the underlying interests and emotions, and really listen for assets, right? And that includes aspirations, opportunities, resources. Oh, it sounds like we have people who are really excited about being part of something. How can we mobilize them to get to a better place? Or again, just that care, right? The fact that people care so much is an asset. It can seem like a threat. If you harness it productively, it's a huge asset. It sounds like we have a lot of agreement about what we value about this community, what an asset that is. I'll come back to that later. So listen for assets, including aspirations, opportunities, and resources. And then really listen for the opportunity for positive change, right? What's the, someone might be complaining, what's the positive intent of that? How could we move in a productive direction, right? So you listen for all those things, whether you're listening to yourself or you're listening to other people, and you state if it's your own, right? Try to make a productive framing, or you might help somebody restate in a way that's responsive and focuses on the opportunity, interests, and assets. So let's walk through some examples of that in a moment. Real quickly before we do that, I just want to note that empowering framing is choosing to see, think, and talk about the world in a way that empowers and inspires us and others to make positive change, right? Again, that idea of being part of the problem-solving enterprise. It is not just putting on rosy tinted glasses, pretending there aren't problems, pretending the issues aren't real, pretending they're not challenging. It's not also negating our other people's feelings or concerns, right? We're not washing stuff away. We're just taking what we call a block and turning it into a gift. How do we move forward with this? It's an improv idea. In improv, you don't want to block someone in a scene. You want to work with them. And that's what we're doing, is how do we work with this and make it an opportunity? How do we make it something productive? And also just a note about empowering reframing, right? When we're helping people reframe, or even reframing for ourselves, the idea of a reframe is to help people shift to a more empowering way of seeing and thinking about issues, right? And also help them feel seen and heard. So again, I'm not just taking your words and reflecting something back at you in a way that you're like, yeah, you're just, no, you didn't hear me. And I'm saying, it sounds to me like you're really concerned about this and like you'd like to see some positive change, right? I'm hearing you and I'm just moving what you're saying in a more productive direction. So let's walk through some examples. So I'm going to give some examples, and I'm going to give an example of a reframe. So maybe it's something you're thinking like, ooh, how could I positively reframe this in a way that's going to be more empowering? And then I'm going to give an example of a reframe, right? Maybe somebody said this to you and you're going to help them try to see it in a more positive direction. So first example might be something like, this housing situation is out of control due to all of these people moving in. It's overwhelming. I wish the rich people would just leave, right? So that could be the like thinking in your head and you say, Stop. That's not really empowering framing. That's not really getting me anywhere. So what's really going on for me, right? What's the opportunity? What are the interests? What's an asset framing? How do I be responsive? And you might come up with, this housing situation is really challenging. How might our community work on this, and what may be able to learn from other communities, right? Learning from others is a huge asset. Learning from other people, learning from other communities, tapping into other resources, right? So that might be a reframe. Or sorry, your own framing. And then a reframe, somebody says this to you again, the housing situation is out of control due to all these people moving in. It's overwhelming. I wish the rich people would just leave. Somebody says that to you and say, I hear that you're really concerned about our local housing situation. I am too. Let's explore some opportunities for how we can make things better and what resources can help us, right? So I'm taking it and shifting it. And especially if you really meet someone where they're at and you're really hearing what they're saying, more often than not, they're going to come along for the ride. And this like, oh yeah, that sounds a lot better than just sitting here and not seeing any way forward. So example two ways of framing the same situation, right? In your head, you might be thinking, this is crazy. There are way too many people here. I can't even get across town these days due to all of these people, to all this crowding, this traffic, whatever. Right? You might be like, okay, not super empowering framing. I'm going to stop, think about it. What's really going on for me? What are my interests? What's the opportunity? The 4 little things. And you might think, my commute across town is taking longer than it used to. I wonder if there are any ways I can improve my mode of travel and what the town can do to maybe improve mobility. Maybe I should go be part of those conversations, right? So that's an empowering reframe in your own mind. Now, if somebody says this to you, right? It's crazy, too many people here, can't get across town. You might say something like, it sounds like you're concerned about crowding and would like for it to be easier to get across town. Do you have any ideas for how we could address those concerns? Right? Taking what you hand me, shifting it a little bit, handing it back as a gift, trying to help you feel more empowered and feel heard. So third example, and kind of reframing your own mind, might be something like, these at-risk youth are such a problem. We need to fix our schools, right? You're going on some rant about that. And you're like, stop. Let me think about what's really going on here. How could I have a more empowering frame? You might come up with, how do we help our local youth access opportunities to enable them to fulfill their potential? If I'm really concerned about this issue, how am I going to help make it better, right? And framing that's going to go a long way. If somebody makes that statement to you, these at-risk youth are such a problem, we need to fix our schools. You might say something like, it sounds like you have some concerns about our local youth and schools and what would be some best possible outcomes for our young people and how can we help them get there? Right. And one thing you might notice that when I'm reframing, I'm almost always asking a question. That's a really valuable skill in all communication. Again, it's kind of a lesson for another course, and just really good to kind of hand things back as a question. That way, especially if you haven't quite heard somebody, gives them more of an opening to say, well, that's not really what I was getting at, or, well, now that you mention it, right? So I'm not just projecting statements at you. I'm trying to reframe, I'm handing back a question, and just really trying to engage you in some conversation. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I just presented quite a bit of information at you all. These are kind of rapid fire teasers on these topics. I'm going to ask everybody to open up your chat again, and I'm going to ask you to respond to this question via chat. So you can type your response in. Please make sure your chat is going to everyone so all of our participants can see it. And the first question I'd like you to respond to is just, what's one insight, observation, or takeaway you're having from this session thus far? So take a moment, think about that. When you're ready, type that response into chat, and you can just hit enter whenever you're ready. We'll see what comes in. Okay, these are starting to come in. Again, while you're typing, I'll just reflect back a few things I'm seeing. This idea of involving the complainers in creating solutions, right? Absolutely. Don't get to just show up and complain. If you're implicated in this problem, if you need to be part of the problem-solving enterprise. And I'm not saying this is your problem. I'm saying, how are we going to work together on it? Huge reframe. Yeah, just how to kind of diffuse people. You're getting negative energy. How do you diffuse that negative energy, and how do you harness the potential of that energy? Yeah, we're all just people working with other people. Absolutely, right? We're all so perfect in our imperfections. And usually when people show up and they're getting angry at you, it's because they care so much. And if we can be really well neurologically regulated and approach that with calm and see what's really happening and say, wow, I appreciate, like, you're yelling in my face and I appreciate you care so much about this. And I want to hear what you have to say. And when you're yelling at me, it's really hard to understand. So can we go have some conversation about this? And again, there's a lot of training we could do on all of that fun stuff, and just reframing and just kind of taking responsibility for your own state goes so far towards helping with that. And lots of good stuff coming in again. Just, yeah, paradigm shift, total paradigm shift in how we govern, right? From I'm the public official and it's my job to solve your problems to we are all part of this and we're all going to have to work together. And the role of government is to mobilize people to solve the problems of the public, but not to fix the problems. Huge paradigm shift. Yeah, listening to understand. I mean, that's huge. We all learn that skill, that and interests versus positions are probably the two most important things I teach in most of my training. Yeah, again, lots of good stuff there. Thanks everyone for sharing. If you have a few more thoughts, you can add those to the chat. Have just a few more questions. Again, it's so fun to see what's sticking for people. So I want to ask you all to kind of think about how are you going to put this into action? So where is one place in your life or work where empowering framing might be helpful? Where could you see some of these skills being useful? Again, in your life, in your work, you can think about that broadly. So same thing, just type those into the chat when you're ready. You can hit enter. We'll see what comes in. I do really encourage people to think about how do you put this into action? The best way to take away learning from training is to think about how am I actually going to use these ideas? Yeah, with your teenage son, absolutely. Like the best place to practice these skills is like in your everyday life. I'll have students say, well, where do I practice these skills? I'm like, well, when you're talking to your roommates, when you're talking to your significant other, when you're talking to your kids, when you're talking to your colleagues. So every day provides many opportunities. And Liz, via our NAR initiative in the chat, just reminded folks, if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A. I can't promise I'll have time to get to them, but I will watch that. Yeah, during public comment periods. Even how you frame, one of the most important things, how you frame questions. So if you're going to send out a survey to get some feedback on a community thing, how you frame those questions is so important. So like here in Salt Lake City, we have a huge debacle over a potential gondola up one of our canyons, right? And you say, do you want a gondola or not? That's a positional framing. People are like, no, yes. That doesn't get me useful information, right? If I say, what do you most care about related to Little Cottonwood Canyon, right? What things would you like to see protected, right? Then I'm going to hear people's interests and then I can evaluate some of our potential solutions through what's important to people. So even those questions you frame or how you set up a public meeting, the questions you ask, like that's all so important. Yeah, so just when you're in a small town and you run into your constituents at the post office and they're complaining at you, great opportunity to help reframe, right? I hear you and I'm helping reframe in a productive direction. Yep, talking about short-term rentals, that's always a fun one. Climate conversations, absolutely. I would say there's a lot of public conversations that we're not framing very well. And part of the reason we're getting bad results is because we're not framing them very well. We're setting ourselves up for positional fights. We're putting people on the defense. We're not helping people feel heard. Yeah, all of that. Again, thank you all for sharing. It's fun to see what's coming up for folks. Okay, so one of the other things we wanted just to put in front of you, and this is really just a teaser to let you know that this is a thing. You can do some more research on your own. We're happy to do some more training if we can mobilize resources to do so. Is this idea of asset-based community development, or what is nicely known as ABCD. And basically the whole idea behind asset-based community development is to apply this idea of effective framing to how we do community development, how we do planning, how we make decisions. So it's an approach to community development that focuses on identifying and leveraging existing assets in a community rather than focusing on the problems, the needs, the deficits. And again, the idea is not that we don't see those challenges, it's just that we're not focused only on those trees. We're looking at the path we want to take, and we'll say we'll deal with those trees as we move down this path we want to take. And basically ABCD, asset-based community development, focuses on the strengths and potential of a community rather than the deficits, right? So we have a lot of people in this community who want to live and work here. That's awesome. Right? Because there are communities where nobody wants to live or work there, they feel stuck there. So like what an asset that is. How are we going to harness that to help then make it possible for people to live and work here, right? So that's an asset-based approach, and just thinking about what strengths do we have to help us deal with challenges, and even mapping those out, everything from community organizations to your natural assets to the intellectual capital in a community. So in thinking about ABCD, asset-based community development, this empowering framing still applies. We're just taking it to like our overall way of thinking about community development, right? So focusing on opportunities, not making it personal, taking an interest-based approach, not a positional approach, really leading and focusing on assets, not deficits. And that idea of we are acting upon, not just being acted upon. This is not just happening to us. And applying that whole framework to how we do planning, how we do community development. And one thing I just want to really emphasize as part of that is we have found in a lot of work with a lot of NAR communities that more people agree about what they value about their community than we tend to think. We tend to think people are really divided, they're fighting each other, you see a lot of conflict. And when you ask people like, what do you care about in this community? More often than not, you hear the natural assets, the open spaces, the livability, the fact I can just walk around town, I feel safe. You're going to hear a lot of similar values in most of these communities. And the fact that often people value many of the same things in their community is a huge asset, right? It is a huge and underused asset. And one of the most important things we think NAR communities and any community can do is really frame policy planning and engagement efforts around those shared values. So people come to a meeting and you say, I want to remind everybody that we've done some engagement with you all and we've heard you really value your open spaces and recreation opportunities and livability and walkability. And we're here today to figure out how to protect those things and enhance those things. So let's keep that in mind as we start to work on this particular whatever we're talking about, right? That framing helps everyone remember, oh yeah, that's the important stuff, right? Those are the opportunities. So that I don't get really fixated on my one little thing, but I'm thinking about the broader, like, what is it we're trying to do here? And that's that North Star that we talked about in our last session on vision, values as vision. So for example, again, what that looks like is, hey, we've done a lot of engagement with you all. We've all identified that people in this community care about small town character, open spaces, livability. How can we work together to provide affordable housing for our local workforce in a way that supports or at least doesn't go against those shared values? That's what we're here to talk about today, right? Framing it up so that you're really mobilizing everybody as part of the problem-solving enterprise, that we keep our North Star front and center. We don't get distracted by the things that don't actually matter that much. So if that interests you, I encourage you to check out our Visions as Values session recording. We have a recording. We'll also put a link directly to the recording for you in the chat. So you can watch the actual recording from the last session. This session will also be recorded. So if you found it helpful, we really encourage you to share it with other people. Liz, I'm going to have you throw that link into the chat if you've got it there. Perfect. Okay, so speaking of chat, I want to get a few more thoughts from you all. I know that's just a really big idea of asset-based community development. Again, that is really a topic for a more thorough training. We're happy to try to put that together if that's of interest. For now, I just want to hear your thoughts about this question. Again, via chat, type your response into chat. To what extent is your community framing its planning and community development efforts around shared community values? And do you think a greater focus on those shared community values would it be helpful? So take a moment. The best you know is just your perspective on this question. When you're ready, you can type that into chat and hit enter. We'll see what comes in. While those are coming in, one thing that was entered in the chat in response to the last question is this idea of engaging community around kind of thinking about the town vision, like thinking really thoughtfully about framing as you think about town vision. And that's the whole last session we did on values as vision, is a reframe on how we think about vision, right? Not this big lofty 1,000-page whatever, right? Of all these things that we don't really have control over, more of like, what is our vision for our community? That it's livable, that it's safe, that it's got great outdoor recreation opportunities, right? That's a vision in a lot of ways. And that's something we can, whenever we make a decision, we can say, these are the things we've identified as important. Is this decision moving us in this direction? If not, maybe we need to tweak it. Sometimes we make things way too complicated and then it's not actually very useful to us. So maybe being more simple in our vision is helpful. So I see a few thoughts coming in here. Again, welcome some more in response to this question. A few things I'm seeing in the chat is some people are using it in certain areas, but it can get kind of siloed. Some communities are kind of trying this approach, trying to think about those shared community values. Again, I'd love to get a few more responses from folks. I'll leave this up for just a few more seconds to see if a few more people will share some thoughts. Get some thoughtful responses coming in. Thanks, everyone. And if you've entered yours, or once you enter yours, I encourage you to see what's in the chat. Seeing that idea of like this idea of a touchstone, right? That these are those touchstones that can be really helpful, really helps hold the community decision makers accountable. And it also helps hold the public accountable, right? If the public is getting angry about something, you're like, well, we're doing this to try to achieve these values. You told us we're important. What are we missing, right? What better ideas do you have, right? You can't just sit here and complain. How are you going to be part of the problem solving enterprise? Seeing some great focus around, certain things like Keep Tahoe Blue has been a big focusing event or focusing frame. Yeah, I can seeing some people thinking about how they could do this in their work. Awesome. Right, hopefully that gave everyone a chance to enter if you wanted to. I have another question for you. Again, thanks everyone for engaging. So this next question, same idea, type your response into chat. Make sure your chat's going to everyone. What do you think about this idea of taking an asset-based approach to community planning and community development? Does it resonate? Do you think you're doing it? Does it not make sense? I'm just curious about your big picture thoughts about it. So same deal, type it into chat and just hit enter whenever you're ready. Look at some things I'm seeing in the chat as folks are getting some more things entered. This idea of hosting a value-based workshop with transportation planners for the state of Utah, finding the feedback really great. Like I think you'll find when you frame around values and things, you get a lot more useful feedback. As somebody said, just more people agree about the assets of a community, right? More people are going to agree about the path we want to take than like the exact nature of all the trees we don't want to hit. Because somebody might be like, I'm concerned about this tree and you're concerned about this tree, but that's not actually what matters. What matters is where are we going, right? Maybe we don't have exactly the same vision, but let's talk about that. And we'll probably find we have a lot more things in common when we get to those fundamental needs and concerns, right? Get off the positions, move to the interests. You'll find you have a lot more in common than you probably could even imagine you do. And yeah, bring people to the table to fix. How are you all going to help us problem solve? And if I don't put you to work, you're probably going to fight and you're just going to complain at me and make it look like it's my responsibility. And it's really all of our responsibility. Yeah, just more positive and constructive input. That's huge. Again, how you frame your request for input is so important. And it's going to really determine what kind of feedback you get. We say that, I'm trying to think how the exact quote goes, but something to the effect of like questions elicit responses in likeness, right? So if I ask a positional question, I'm going to get a positional response. If I ask an open-ended, curious question, I'm probably going to get a more thoughtful response. So just being really thoughtful about how we frame our request for feedback. Yeah, again, so much good stuff there. Thanks everyone for sharing. I'm going to skip that last question because I want to be mindful of time. I would say if you have any additional thoughts or ideas, feel free to dump those into the chat now or let us know. We'll share our contact information. You can find us. So if you have any thoughts or ideas, feel free to share now or down the line. To wrap us up, I do want to note that if you're really intrigued by this idea, you want to know more, you want to connect with your colleagues right after this session, starting at 2:45, we are going to have a peer-to-peer learning session where we will give you some structure and you can talk with each other, dig a little bit deeper into these questions and topics. So we just put the link to register. If you're not already registered, you'll need to use that registration link. It's in the chat. You can go there, register, and that way you'll get a link so that you can get on that peer-to-peer. It's an actual meeting versus a webinar. So anyways, we've got to move over to another Zoom platform. So make sure you use the registration, get registered, use that link, get over there, and hopefully you can engage. That goes until 3:30. Our next session is on January 26th. So after the holidays, it'll begin on re-engaging, mobilizing community through proactive engagement. Again, very much building on what we've been talking about today. How do you engage your community as part of the problem-solving enterprise? Again, just a reminder, we've got this great lineup of events that's all on our website. So you can go there, register for these events. We hope to have you participate in those. You can also find the recordings online after the sessions. And then just a note that you will get an automatic survey after this session closes. just really short, get a few responses from you on a couple questions to help us continue to improve. We want to make sure our webinars and other offerings are really helpful. So please take those few minutes to do that. With that, we are going to close this webinar. We're going to hop over onto that peer-to-peer learning session. Again, the registration for that is in the chat. So grab that if you haven't already, if you want to hop over and meet us there and have some interaction with each other. And with that, I just want to thank everybody. We appreciate the work you're doing in your communities. We want to support you in doing that work. We welcome ideas and partners in helping do that. So with that, have a great rest of your day and hopefully see many of you over on the peer-to-peer session. Thanks, folks.